Hey, Paul. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the military presence that's in this area. Obviously, we have Letterkenny, we have Fort Indiantown Gap, the Navy Depot, Army War College. With the divorces that we handle in this office, military divorce plays a pretty significant role due to all those military bases in the area. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think some of the challenges that come from those divorces are the relocation of the families. They're always moving around and knowing where to file for their divorce and what courts have jurisdiction. That's one of the main challenges that we face, as well as the service members have all their different military benefits and figuring out how those can be divided up and should be divided up in the divorce is another big issue too.
So, what would you say a normal, when I say a normal divorce, a non military divorce, what are the differences between a non military divorce and a military divorce that makes them so complex?
So basically, the military and the Department of Defense controls a lot of the benefits and especially the retirement of service members. And so to get access to those, we have to comply with federal statutes that are meant to both protect the service members and their families. And so dealing with that and then how those assets can be divided can be particularly challenging versus a lot of private accounts and benefits are more easily accessed and divided without implicating any federal issues.
Okay. And if specifically, let's talk about the retirement accounts. How does that differ with respect to a military divorce opposed to a non military divorce?
Yeah, so military retirement, the whole system has gone through a change with the new blended retirement system. So uh, we can talk first about the military pension. So that's obviously the payments that service members that retire from the military get. And so that pension can be divided up. And again, there's an issue with how that can be paid to the spouse, whether it's directly or from the service member to the spouse. And then we also have the thrift savings plan. So that's the basically IRA account that can also be taken and divided up under certain circumstances.
It also depends on how long the spouse, whether it be the non military spouse and the military spouse, have been married. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, so that's one of the big calculations is how long the service member and the spouse were together and what portion of the military retirement that spouse is then entitled to based on the length of their marriage and that marriage overlapping with the military service. So we see a lot of people who enter the military and then get married and then maybe they're divorcing later in life. And so basically the non-military spouse is only entitled to a portion of those proceeds of the military retirement that were accrued while the service member was in the military during their marriage.
And that specific retirement is then calculated by an expert. Am I correct?
Yeah, so it's basically a complicated calculation that takes in a lot of actuarial figures that basically account for the life expectancy and the growth of the fund over time and factoring in things such as inflation because obviously getting a lump sum now may sound great, but having a guaranteed income source later will account for factors like inflation.
And then you had also mentioned, obviously, divide or figuring out what jurisdiction to even file the divorce in, correct?
Yes, and so that's going to look at where the military member is stationed, where the spouse is stationed, where the spouse is at, and then basically where they all originated and whether they basically, because the military basically can't force you to take something up as your actual residence, so basically whether the service member took other efforts to make that their residence afterward.
And then you had also mentioned something about the 2020 rule, I believe.
Yeah, so that basically that's an entitlement for spouses who have been married to a service member for 20 years, and the 20 years of that marriage overlapped with the 20 years of the service member. And so basically, the 2020 spouse is then able to basically keep their military ID as far as getting base, commissary, exchange privileges, and access to the TRICARE benefits as well. So continuing on to the health plan. And so the certain spouses that meet those requirements basically continue on as if they are a military spouse because of that amount of time that they were married to a military member and the amount of time the military member was in service.
And that is even post-divorce decree, correct?
Yes, they'll retain those privileges.
And I imagine those privileges are very near and dear to people who have them. They don't want to lose them, correct?
Absolutely, yeah, they're valuable.
And just to be clear, this is a basic overview of some complex complex issues that come up in military divorce. This is not everything. This was just a brief overview, correct?
Yeah, and again, a lot of this focused on kind of the longer term issues, and so some of our younger service members, especially those who are married but without children, they obviously, once you become married, you get the dependent benefits, so you get basically increased pay, different housing allowance, and then especially more benefits if you're deployed overseas for your spouse when they remain. So for those younger folks who are contemplating a divorce, they want to think about losing their dependency status after a divorce decree is entered. So basically a cut in their pay due to them being now not having any dependents, which was formerly their spouse. So,
as I sit here, Paul, I am sitting here thinking how much you seem to know about military divorce, and I was shocked, but then I realized you also are a veteran yourself right now. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I was in the Navy for 8 years before going to law school.
Well, I appreciate your service.